We had been renting cramped apartments for years, and finally, Aaron and I thought it was our turn to have a house of our own. After months of searching, we found a charming two-story home in a sleepy Ohio suburb. It had everything we wanted: 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, and a small backyard where Cooper, our golden retriever, could run. The previous owners had kept it well maintained, and at first glance, it seemed perfect. The first night, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was silent in a way I wasn't used to. Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded distant, like it was being swallowed by the walls. Aaron, ever optimistic, reassured me it was just an empty house, a new space for us to fill. Cooper, however, wasn't convinced. He paced restlessly, ears perked, growling softly at corners that were empty. The first incident was minor. A door creaked in the middle of the night. I assumed it was the house settling. But the next morning I found that the basement door, which I had locked the night before, was slightly ajar. I thought maybe Erin had forgotten, but she insisted she hadn't touched it. It got worse. Footsteps in the hallway when we were alone, whispers that seemed to come from behind the walls, and the feeling that someone was always watching us. Erin told me she had woken one morning to see a shadow at the foot of our bed, dark and thin, like a figure watching her. By the time I got to the room, it was gone, but the unease lingered. One afternoon, while organizing boxes in the basement, Erin discovered a hidden cavity behind a panel of drywall. Inside was a small, rusted wooden box. In it were 3 items: a key that didn't fit any lock in the house, a faded photograph of the house taken decades earlier, and a slip of paper with the word "leave" written in hurried, smudged ink. My stomach sank. I tried to laugh it off, but Erin could see the fear in my eyes, and she knew I wasn't joking. That night, the activity escalated. Knocking at the walls, doors slamming, lights flickering on and off. Cooper refused to go near the basement, and he wouldn't sleep in our room either. Then we heard the footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate pacing outside our bedroom door. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept under the bed and slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the air felt heavy, suffocating, like something had been there and had just disappeared. Over the next few weeks, it became worse. Erin woke with long scratches along her arms that weren't there before she slept. I heard whispers calling my name in the kitchen, and sometimes objects would be moved around the house. The sense of being watched never left, and even in daylight, the house felt wrong, cold, heavy, almost alive. Then came the night we decided we couldn't stay. Erin woke screaming, her body shaking violently. Something invisible had pinned her to the bed, gripping her throat. I pulled her free, but her neck was marked with bruises. That was the final straw. We packed essentials and fled in the middle of the night, leaving nearly everything behind: furniture, clothes, personal items. Weeks later, I returned in daylight to collect a few remaining items. The house appeared normal, quiet, almost welcoming, but the basement still held that icy chill. I checked behind the panel again, and the wooden box was gone. We never returned. The house was put up for sale again, waiting for the next family who thought they had found their dream home, unaware of the presence that lingered inside, waiting for them in the shadows, the walls, the basement, where the air was always colder than it should be. Story, the end. I never thought buying a house could feel like a mistake before you even moved in, but that's exactly how it started for me. We'd been hunting for months, looking for something in a quiet neighborhood, a place where my wife Jenna and I could finally settle down. When the listing for the old Victorian came up, I thought it was perfect. 4 bedrooms, a big yard, and enough charm to make it worth the price. The agent mentioned it had been on the market for over a year, but shrugged it off as a pricing issue. The first time I walked through, the place smelled like dust and old wood. There was a faint tang of something else too, metallic and musty, that I couldn't place. The floors creaked under every step, and I remember feeling a chill even though the sun was streaming through the tall windows. Jenna, of course, was enamored. "It's perfect," she said, running her hands over the banister. "Imagine the kids growing up here." Our kids weren't born yet, but we imagined them anyway. The night we moved in, I slept in what would become our master bedroom, surrounded by boxes and blankets. I remember hearing the settling noises that old houses always make: pops, groans, the occasional squeak of floorboards. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a soft sound, whispering. It was so faint I thought I might be imagining it until it grew clearer, a murmur that seemed to come from just outside the bedroom door. I froze, straining to hear. The whispering stopped, replaced by a soft scrape, like nails dragged along wood. I grabbed the flashlight on the nightstand and swung it toward the hallway. Nothing. I shook Jenna awake. She didn't hear anything. I didn't tell her about the whispering, not yet. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, but it wasn't. The next morning, I noticed that some of the boxes we'd left in the hallway had been moved. Not by much, just slightly, but enough to make me question it. I told myself it was probably me during a half-conscious sleep. Then it started happening more often. Doors that had been closed were open. Cabinets we'd locked were ajar. The sound of footsteps at night, slow and deliberate, pacing the hallways. I began to feel watched, even during the day. Shadows seemed to shift just outside the corner of my eyes. Jenna didn't believe me at first. "It's an old house," she said. "These things happen." But the kids we had in the next year, twin boys, brought their own experiences. Late at night, one would wake screaming about a man standing in the corner of their room, pale and silent. The other would insist the whispers told him things he didn't want to hear. I told myself it was nightmares, maybe some residue of moving stress, but the intensity and frequency couldn't be ignored. I started documenting everything: the times the footsteps occurred, objects moving, the kids, complaints. I even recorded a few nights. One night, reviewing the footage, I froze. There on the camera, a shadow passed across the hallway. Not a person, not a trick of the light. It didn't have a solid form, but I could see the outline of a man, hunched, moving slowly, deliberately. That's when the dreams started. They were vivid and terrifying. I dreamed of walking down the hallway at night and seeing the figure standing at the top of the stairs, watching me. I would wake up in a cold sweat, only to hear the same footsteps echoing in the house. Sometimes I'd hear whispering in my dreams that carried over into wakefulness, the words clear: "Leave, leave." Jenna finally started to experience them too. She would wake with scratches on her arms, bruises forming in odd patterns overnight. She stopped sleeping in our bedroom and took to sleeping in the living room with the twins. The final straw came one night about 6 months after moving in. I woke to the sound of the twins screaming. I ran to their room and found the closet door wide open. The room was freezing, my breath visible in the air. I turned toward the sound of whispering and saw him. A man, pale and hollow-eyed, standing at the foot of their bed. I tried to move, to grab him, to push him, but my body felt like it was underwater, every movement sluggish, useless. He tilted his head slowly, just enough to make me feel like he was studying me, then whispered, "They're mine now." Jenna screamed and ran in with the boys, and he vanished. The door slammed behind her. I grabbed the phone and called anyone I could think of: police, neighbors, priests, but nothing came. There was no evidence, nothing but the terror we felt. We moved out that week, packed the car in a frenzy, leaving half the furniture, all the memories, but I know the house still waits. It waits for the next family, the next people to walk through its doors, drawn in by charm and a price that seems too good to be true. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and swear I hear footsteps on my old wooden floors. The whispering, the cold. Even though we are miles away now, even though we are safe, or as safe as we can be, I can't shake the feeling that it followed us, at least in memory. I warn anyone who looks at an old house with charm and price too good to be true: some houses aren't empty. Some houses don't want you to stay, and some houses don't want you to leave. Story the end. I had been dreaming about owning my own house for years. After renting cramped apartments in the city, I finally found a modest 2-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. It was a bit older, built in the late 70s, with faded beige siding and a wraparound porch that had clearly seen better days. The backyard was small but private, bordered by thick trees, and the interior had enough room for my small collection of furniture. The price was right, and I convinced myself that the few repairs needed were part of the charm. The first night was unsettling, not in a way I could explain, just off. The house felt heavy, like it carried the weight of years of someone else's life. I was alone, of course, but when I turned off the lights, I felt eyes on me. I chalked it up to the adjustment of moving into a new space. The creaks and groans of the old floorboards were normal, I told myself. But soon, the oddities began. On the second night, I heard the faint sound of someone walking across the living room. I paused, holding my breath, but the sound stopped. I checked the front door, which was locked, and every window. Nothing had moved. I tried to sleep, convincing myself it was just my imagination. The first week passed with little else, though I started noticing small things. Keys I left on the kitchen counter would be on the dining table in the morning. A towel left folded in the laundry room would be unfolded, hanging over the edge of the washer. I began taking videos at night, setting my phone down to record the living room, but nothing ever appeared in the footage. Then came the whispers. At first they were just faint, almost like the wind moving through the cracks in the windows, but they grew louder, forming words I couldn't always make out. Sometimes it sounded like someone calling my name, but it wasn't friendly. There was a sharpness, an impatience to it. I started sleeping with a lamp on, the glow barely keeping the fear at bay. One night I woke to the sound of the front door unlocking. My heart raced. I had double-checked every lock before bed. I grabbed a baseball bat I kept by the bed and crept down the hallway. The house was empty, but the living room light flickered on and off. Then I saw it, a shadow moving against the far wall, tall, thin, impossible to place. When I stepped closer, it vanished. My phone had died overnight, so no evidence remained. I called the previous owner, hoping for some logical explanation. She hesitated, then admitted she had left in a hurry. I couldn't stay, she said. There's something in that house, something that doesn't want anyone here. You'll see. She hung up abruptly. From then on, the occurrences escalated. The basement door, which had been locked, would appear wide open in the morning. Footsteps pounded across the second-floor hallway when I was alone. Sometimes I'd hear heavy breathing behind me, only to turn and see the hallway empty. Once, I awoke to find my bedroom door wide open, though I always locked it before sleep. One night, around midnight, I woke to something brushing against my foot. I froze. The air was icy cold. Slowly, I looked down and saw a pale hand disappearing under the bed. My dog, normally calm, growled low in her throat. Hair bristled. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, sitting on the edge of the bed with a flashlight clutched in my hand. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it all, but the evidence piled up. Food in the fridge went missing. Objects moved across rooms. The whispers became clearer. Sometimes just laughter, sometimes low murmurs that sounded like a conversation I couldn't understand. The breaking point came 3 months after I moved in. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of heavy footsteps pacing the hallway. My bedroom door rattled. I grabbed the baseball bat and flung it open. The hallway was empty, but the air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. I went to the basement door, drawn by some unexplainable force, and froze. There, written on the wall in what looked like dried mud or rust, were words, "Leave now." I ran. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, anything I could carry, and drove to a motel. I didn't sleep for days, constantly checking my phone, imagining shadows following me in the windows of the house. I hired a moving company to collect my belongings, but even they refused to enter the basement. After retrieving my furniture, I sold the house at a loss. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted it gone. But even now, years later, I sometimes dream about that house. I hear the whispers, the heavy footsteps, and the feeling of eyes on me. And sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I hear the basement door opening. I don't know what was in that house. I don't know why it targeted me. All I know is that some places are alive in ways we can't understand, and sometimes they don't want to share their space. Story the end. I remember the day we first stepped into the house like it was yesterday, even though it's been months now. My husband Mark and I had been searching for over a year for a house that felt right. Something old enough to have charm, but not so old that it would be falling apart. When we saw the listing for the place on the outskirts of a small town in Pennsylvania, we were immediately drawn to it. 2 stories, red brick, a wraparound porch, and a backyard that seemed to go on forever. The realtor promised it was a quiet neighborhood, and I remember feeling a strange mix of excitement and apprehension as we drove up the winding lane that led to it. The interior was surprisingly well kept. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, A large kitchen with outdated appliances that somehow added character, and rooms filled with natural light. We didn't think twice before making an offer, which thankfully was accepted within a week. Moving in was chaotic, of course. Boxes everywhere, furniture out of place, the smell of old wood mixed with cleaning supplies. Mark insisted on unpacking first, while I tried to make the bedrooms cozy. We didn't notice anything strange at first, just the usual settling noises of an old house. But by the third night, the house started to feel different. It started with small things. Doors we knew we had closed tightly would be open in the morning. Lights would flicker when no one touched the switches. At first, I blamed it on Mark forgetting to turn them off or the old wiring acting up. But one night, I woke to the sound of soft footsteps outside our bedroom door. I nudged Mark, assuming it was him, but he was sound asleep. The footsteps stopped as soon as I opened my mouth to call out. I tried not to let it get to me, but the incidents continued. The strange noises were almost always at night. Whispering voices, scratching sounds from the walls, the occasional loud bang in the kitchen. Mark didn't believe me at first. Old houses make noises, he said, and I wanted to believe him. Then Jenna, our neighbor from across the street, came over one evening. She mentioned something that chilled me to the bone. "You know, this house has a history," she said casually, as if it was no big deal. "The family before the last one, they left in the middle of the night. Nobody knows why." I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but the unease in her tone told me otherwise. A week later, the unease became impossible to ignore. I was in the basement unpacking storage boxes when I noticed a door at the far end of the room. It was small, almost hidden behind an old shelf, and had a rusty latch. I hesitated, then opened it. The air inside smelled damp and musty, like the house had been hiding it for decades. Crawling in, I realized it was a narrow crawl space, just wide enough to move through on my hands and knees. I found deep scratches along the walls, some of them jagged, others forming strange symbols. I felt a chill run down my spine and hurried out, shutting the door behind me. That night, I had nightmares about crawling through that space, hearing whispers and feeling breath on the back of my neck. The strange events escalated. Doors would slam shut on their own. We started hearing whispers in the hallways, sometimes just unintelligible murmurs, other times words we couldn't quite catch. Our dog, who had been calm since we brought her home, began growling at the corner of rooms or refusing to go near the basement. One night, Mark was in the kitchen when he called me down. "Did you see that?" he asked, voice trembling. I rushed in and saw the kitchen lights flicker violently. The refrigerator door was open, even though we had closed it, and on the floor there was a trail of dirt that led to the basement door. I followed it, heart pounding, but there was no one there. Things got worse. I started seeing shadows moving in my peripheral vision, disappearing whenever I looked directly at them. I heard scratching in the walls, sometimes like nails, other times like claws. Our nights were plagued by a cold presence, a feeling of being watched from the dark corners of the house. Then came the night I saw it. I was alone in the living room, reading, when the air suddenly turned icy. The lights flickered and went out. In the dim glow from the streetlights outside, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. Tall, thin, its face obscured in shadow. It didn't move, but I could feel its eyes on me. My heart raced, and I froze. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Mark didn't believe me when I told him. "You're stressed," he said. But a week later, he saw it too. He was coming up the stairs from the basement when he froze mid-step, staring at the hallway. It's right there," he whispered. And there it was, a figure at the end of the hall, barely visible, but unmistakably there. We started avoiding certain rooms. The basement became off-limits. The small crawlspace door we had once ignored now felt like a trap we had narrowly escaped. Every night, the whispers grew louder. Sometimes we would wake to find objects moved, rearranged, or broken. The breaking point came when I woke to find a message scratched into the floorboards of our bedroom. "Leave before it takes you." Mark and I didn't wait another night. We packed what we could carry and stayed in a hotel for a week. When we returned, we only went to retrieve essentials. The house felt darker, heavier, almost alive with a malevolent presence. I peeked into the basement one last time. The crawlspace door was open again, even though we had closed it. Inside, the wall was scratched with more words. You belong here with me. Um, we sold the house immediately. We didn't care about the loss, the money. It wasn't worth staying. But even months later, sometimes when I lie awake at night, I hear faint whispers and the soft scraping of moving in the dark, and I wonder if it's still following us. Story the end. The end. When we first laid eyes on the house, it seemed like it had jumped right out of a dream. A two-story American colonial with white siding, black shutters, and a wraparound porch nestled in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. My husband, Tom, and I had been searching for months for a home that offered both charm and space for our three kids. The realtor emphasized the house's character and its untouched charm, but she was vague about why it had sat empty for over a year. We didn't ask further, we were just grateful to have finally found something within our budget. The first few nights were normal enough. Boxes were everywhere, kids running through hallways and arguing over bedrooms. I was excited to finally have a kitchen I could stand in without bumping into someone, and a backyard that was large enough for a swing set. But soon, small things started happening. Things I initially dismissed as quirks of an old house. It started with the noises. At night, I would hear soft thumps from upstairs, like footsteps pacing slowly in the hallway. Sometimes it was a whisper, just faint enough to make me question whether I'd actually heard it. Tom brushed it off, blaming it on settling floors or wind rattling the windows. I wanted to believe him. Then the kids started noticing things. Our daughter, Hannah, who was 7, began waking up terrified in the middle of the night. She claimed she could see a man standing by her dresser, watching her. Our son, Liam, said he heard someone calling his name from the basement, even though we had locked the door. At first, we thought they were just having bad dreams, but the fear in their eyes felt real. One evening, while putting away groceries, I found a small box tucked behind the pantry shelves. Inside were old photographs of children I didn't recognize and small broken toys. The photos were faded, the kids with eyes dark and empty. A shiver ran down my spine, and I shoved the box back, trying to tell myself it was nothing. The attic became the most unsettling part of the house. We hadn't been up there since moving in, but one night I woke to hear something moving above my bedroom. The attic ladder had slowly lowered itself, creaking as it swung back and forth. Gathering my courage, I climbed up. The attic was filled with boxes, old furniture, and dust thick enough to choke on. But then I saw something I couldn't ignore. A small child's shoe, worn and stained, placed neatly atop an old trunk. I shivered and hurried back downstairs, convinced I was imagining things. As days passed, the occurrences intensified. Doors slammed shut on their own. Cold spots appeared in random corners of the house. One morning, Tom found his tools arranged in a circle on the garage floor, like some ritual had taken place. At night, whispers drifted from rooms we weren't occupying. Sometimes I thought I could hear someone humming, a slow, eerie tune that would vanish as soon as I tried to locate it. One night, Hannah woke screaming again. She claimed the man in her room had moved closer, standing at the foot of her bed. We searched every corner, but nothing was there. Liam refused to go near the basement, insisting that he lives down there. Even Tom, who had never been easily spooked, began sleeping with the lights on, claiming he felt like someone was watching him. Then the writing appeared. On the wall of the hallway outside our bedroom, scratched lightly into the paint, were words I can't forget. Leave before it's too late. My hands shook as I ran my fingers over the letters. I wanted to call the police, but I knew they would think we were imagining it. The final night in that house was the worst. We had planned to stay one last night to finish packing. Around 2 a.m, I woke to footsteps outside our bedroom. I called Tom's name, but the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, circling the room. Then I heard whispers, my name, the kids' names, a soft, malicious laughter that made my blood run cold. Tom and I grabbed the children, ran out of the house, and didn't stop until we were at a hotel downtown. We never returned. The house was eventually sold, but I've never stopped thinking about it. I still have nightmares about the figure in the hallway, the whispers in the walls, and the child's shoe in the attic. Even years later, whenever I see an old, empty house, my heart tightens, and I feel the same dread I felt those nights. Some places carry more than memories. Some places carry something else entirely, something that never leaves, no matter how far you run. Story the end. When we first saw the house, it seemed like a dream come true. A three-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Pennsylvania with wide windows, a large backyard, and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. My husband Mark and I were ecstatic. After months of apartment hunting and endless compromises, we had finally found a home we both loved, and for a price that didn't break the bank. The real estate agent was unusually eager to close the deal, brushing aside our questions about why the previous owners had left so suddenly. She just smiled and said the house had a lot of character. We didn't think much of it at the time. Moving day was hectic, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. The kids, Ethan and Sophie, ran through the rooms laughing and arguing over whose room would be whose. The first few nights were peaceful. The house was quiet, even comforting. It had the smell of old wood and faint lavender, which I assumed came from the previous owners. It started subtly. The first odd thing was the knocking. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A soft tap against the walls, almost like someone was testing them. Mark and I assumed it was just the house settling. But then we noticed the footsteps. Late at night, when the house was still, you could hear slow, deliberate steps in the hallway outside our bedroom. When we got up to check, the hall would be empty. Sophie began waking up in the middle of the night crying, claiming someone was standing in her room. She would point to corners where nothing was, insist there was a man there, and sometimes call him by name, though we had never told her anyone's name that wasn't part of our family. Ethan, on the other hand, said he could hear whispering from his closet, faint voices that would disappear when he tried to listen closely. One evening, I was alone in the kitchen, putting away groceries, when I heard a faint humming. At first, I thought it was the radio or a neighbor, but the sound was coming from inside the house. I followed it to the basement door. The basement was unfinished, dark except for a single bulb near the ceiling. The humming stopped as soon as I flicked the light on. The air felt cold, too cold for a summer night, and I had to shake the feeling of dread that ran down my spine before going back upstairs. Mark started hearing things too. He complained of hearing his name whispered when he was alone in the house. Objects would be moved when no one was around. One morning, we came down to find all the chairs in the dining room arranged in a perfect circle, facing inward, like some strange ritual had taken place. The attic became the focus of our unease. We had left it untouched for weeks, storing only boxes we hadn't unpacked. One night, I woke to the sound of a door creaking open. I went to investigate and found the attic ladder pulled down slightly, swinging back and forth. I was sure I had locked it before bed. Gathering my courage, I climbed up. The attic was dark, dusty, and silent, but I noticed something strange. A small, neatly stacked pile of children's shoes in the corner, not ours, and a doll sitting on top of an old trunk, staring straight at me with one eye chipped. I felt the hair on my arms stand up and quickly went back downstairs. Sophie became more frightened as the days passed. She refused to be alone in her room, and at night she would sit by our bed and whisper about the man in the corners who watched her while she slept. Ethan started drawing pictures of dark figures with long shadows creeping behind the family, despite never talking about anything like that before. One night, I woke to the sound of someone breathing in the hall. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check. The beam caught something at the end of the corridor, a figure hunched over, facing the wall. I called out, and it didn't move. I took a step forward, and the figure disappeared. The temperature in the hall dropped drastically, and I had to shake my hands to get feeling back into them. Things escalated further when Mark went to fix a leak in the bathroom upstairs. He was alone, and I heard him shout. Rushing upstairs, I found him pale, staring at the ceiling. He said something had whispered in his ear, telling him to leave before it's too late. That night, we slept in the living room together, the kids between us, but it didn't help. Footsteps paced outside the closed bedroom doors. Doors rattled as though someone was shaking them, and faint crying echoed from the corners of the house. The final straw came when I was cooking one evening. I heard Ethan laughing upstairs, but when I went to check, his bedroom was empty. Then I heard Sophie's soft voice calling me from her room, but she was asleep on the couch, tucked in with a blanket. In a panic, Mark and I decided to leave the house and stay at a friend's for the night. The next day, we returned briefly to gather some belongings, and I noticed something etched into the wall behind the kitchen table. It wasn't there before. The words were scratched lightly, almost as if a fingernail had made them. You belong to me now. We left that day and never returned. The house was eventually sold, though I still wonder about it. I think about Sophie and Ethan, about the eyes in the attic, about the whispers in the hallways. I try to tell myself it was stress or imagination or a combination of old wood settling and children's vivid imaginations. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can hear the faint creak of that porch swing and the echo of whispers calling my name. Story the end. I had always been excited about moving into my first house. It was a modest two-story brick home on the outskirts of a small town in Ohio, far enough from the highway that you could actually hear the wind rustling through the trees at night. The previous owners had lived there for decades, and the neighborhood was quiet, the kind where everyone waved at each other from their driveways. Aaron and I had spent months saving, touring dozens of homes, and finally settled on this one because it felt solid, like it had been built to last. The first week was filled with the usual chaos, moving boxes, assembling furniture, trying to get utilities set up. But even through that, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me. It sounds absurd now, but there was something in the way the shadows seemed to cling to corners, or the way the hallway lights flickered when no one was near the switches. Erin noticed it too, though she laughed it off, saying I was just being paranoid after a long day. The first real incident happened 2 nights after moving in. I was unpacking boxes in the guest room when I heard the unmistakable sound of something walking across the upstairs hallway. The steps were slow, deliberate, heavy. I called out to Erin, expecting her to answer from the bedroom, but there was only silence. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check. The hallway was empty, the doors closed, yet the air felt wrong, like the warmth of the house had drained from that corridor. We tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the creaks of an old house settling. But the next morning, I noticed scratches along the stair rail, long, thin lines, as if someone had dragged their fingernails along it. I knew we hadn't done it. Erin swore she hadn't, and I had been too busy with boxes. That's when the dread started to grow. The basement was the worst. Finished with dark carpeting and low ceilings, it had been set up as a sort of rec room by the previous owners. The first time I went down there alone, I noticed the temperature dropped immediately. Even in the middle of a summer afternoon, it felt icy. I was halfway across the room when I heard a soft whisper behind me. I spun around, but there was no one, only the shadow of a hanging light swaying gently. Cooper, our new golden retriever, barked once, low in warning, then backed up the stairs. After that, we started hearing things regularly, footsteps at night, whispers from the walls, doors opening and closing on their own. Erin woke one morning with bruises along her arms, thin, red lines like fingernail scratches. She didn't remember anything, and I didn't either. We tried to convince ourselves it was stress, bad dreams, but then the dog refused to sleep in the bedroom, hiding under the bed, growling at the far corners of the room. One afternoon, Erin was cleaning the basement closet and discovered a small cavity behind an old panel of drywall. Inside was a rusted tin box. I opened it carefully and found 3 objects: a small yellowed Polaroid of the house, a key that didn't seem to fit anything in the house, and a note with a single word scrawled in faded ink: leave. My stomach turned cold. I tried to laugh it off, but the hairs on my neck stood up as I looked at the box. That night, the activity escalated, knocking at the walls, footsteps pacing back and forth, and finally, a shadow, a tall, thin figure in the hallway outside our bedroom. I froze, heart hammering, watching it linger just at the edge of the light. When I blinked, it was gone, but the sense of being watched never left. Weeks went by like that. Every night was a battle against the house. We tried to leave lights on, tried to block doors, even slept with the dog between us, but nothing helped. Then came the night that made us leave for good. Erin woke screaming. Something invisible had pinned her to the bed, hands around her throat. I shook her awake, trying to fight off whatever was holding her. When she gasped free, her neck was marked with bruises, fingers pale and trembling. That was it. We packed our essentials and left in the middle of the night. Furniture, boxes, personal items, we left it all. Weeks later, I went back in daylight to retrieve a few things. The house seemed normal. Sunlight streamed in through the windows, but the basement felt the same, cold and suffocating. When I looked behind the panel again, the tin box was gone. Whatever had been in that house, we never saw it, but we felt it. The realtor later told us the house had been sold and resold multiple times, often by families who left after just a few months. The reasons were always vague, felt uncomfortable, couldn't stay there. We never returned. The house still sits on that quiet street, waiting for the next family who thinks they've found their dream home, unaware of what lingers inside. Story the end. We found the house by accident. I'd been browsing online listings one rainy afternoon when a small, out-of-the-way property caught my eye. It wasn't much, a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom ranch in rural Pennsylvania, but the price was shockingly low. My husband Mark and I had been renting for years, and although the house clearly needed work, we were desperate to own something of our own. The realtor assured us it was just dated and needed some TLC. We didn't ask too many questions beyond that. The first time we drove up, the street was narrow and lined with tall pines. The house itself sat at the end of a long driveway, slightly set back from the road. It had that classic worn charm, peeling paint on the siding, a sagging porch, windows streaked from years of rain. Mark and I were smitten. Inside, the floors creaked, the walls were covered in faded wallpaper, and a faint smell of mildew lingered. But we told ourselves that could be fixed. It would be our project. We signed the papers 2 weeks later. Moving day was chaotic, but we were too excited to notice anything unusual. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake a sense of being watched. The house was eerily silent aside from the occasional creak of the floorboards, but it felt heavy, oppressive. I brushed it off, thinking it was just nerves. Mark slept soundly beside me. It started with small things. Objects would be out of place. I'd leave a book on the coffee table, only to find it on the kitchen counter the next morning. Doors that I was sure I'd closed were open, and vice versa. At first, I thought it was absent-mindedness, or maybe Mark moving things while I wasn't looking, but he insisted he hadn't touched anything. The basement was worse. It was unfinished, damp, and dark, with a single bare bulb that flickered sometimes. One evening, I went down to check the fuse box, and I swear I heard whispering. It wasn't words I could understand, just low murmurs, like a conversation happening in the shadows. I froze, straining to hear, but it stopped as suddenly as it started. I convinced myself it was my imagination, though a part of me wasn't convinced. Mark noticed the changes too. He started hearing footsteps at night, sometimes pacing above the living room, sometimes across the hall outside our bedroom. One night, he woke me up, pale and shaking. "Someone's in the house," he whispered. We searched every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. But the sensation never left. It was always there, like the house had its own heartbeat, and it wasn't ours. Then the nightmares began. Mark dreamt of a woman in a long, tattered dress, standing silently at the foot of our bed. I dreamt of a child, pale and hollow-eyed, staring at me from the hallway, its mouth opening in a silent scream. Sometimes we'd wake up at exactly the same time, drenched in sweat, convinced we'd heard the same creaks and whispers. One evening, a neighbor came by. He was an older man with a calm demeanor that didn't quite match the uneasy feeling in his eyes. "You shouldn't be there after dark," he said. We laughed it off, thinking he was just eccentric. But later, when I mentioned the basement, he grew quiet. "They don't like being disturbed," he said finally. "Just stay upstairs. Don't go down after the sun sets." By the time winter came, the house had changed us. Our excitement had turned into exhaustion. The air felt heavier, and even during the day, shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. One night, during a snowstorm, I woke to the sound of the nursery door creaking. Our baby wasn't due for another month, and the room was empty. I froze as a rocking chair slowly moved back and forth, squeaking under an unseen weight. We decided to hire a paranormal investigator, half out of desperation, half out of disbelief. He spent hours wandering the house, recording, taking notes. When he left, he looked grim. "There's something here," he said, "something old. It doesn't want you here. It's attached to the house in ways I've never seen before." He recommended leaving. I didn't need him to tell me. I had already been thinking the same thing. The final straw came one night when Mark woke up screaming. He had been thrown out of bed as if an invisible force had shoved him. I tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't work. The shadows in the room seemed to thicken, and a cold presence pressed down on me. I felt something brush past my arm, something solid and wrong. We grabbed the baby monitor we had set up in the nursery and listened. The soft, unmistakable sound of crying filled the static, even though the baby wasn't born yet. We packed in a panic that night and drove straight to a hotel. The house didn't leave us alone, though. Even from miles away, I could swear I saw shadows moving in the windows when I looked back from the street. Calls to the realtor went unanswered. It was as if the house had swallowed itself into the fog of the small town. We sold the property at a loss, never disclosing the experiences to the new owners. I can't stop thinking about it, even now. Sometimes late at night, I dream of those long hallways, the basement, the rocking chair. And every time I do, I wake up with the same cold, heavy feeling pressing down on my chest like the house never let us go. Story the end. I had been searching for months before I found the house. It was one of those things you stumble across online, a listing that looks almost too good to be true. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath in a quiet neighborhood priced below market. The photos were promising. Hardwood floors, big windows, a backyard that begged for summer evenings. I was tired of apartments, tired of walls that felt like they were closing in. I needed space, a place I could finally breathe. The first time I walked through, the air inside felt cold. Not in temperature, more like a weight pressing down on your chest. Subtle but undeniable. The realtor brushed it off, talking about the quaint charm of an older home. The previous owners had moved out quickly, she said. No drama, just a job relocation. I didn't ask more. I wanted the house, and I wanted it badly. The first night was unremarkable. I unpacked a few boxes, set up the bedroom, and went to bed. But at around 1 a.m., I woke to a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was the wind against the windows. But as I listened, it became clear it was coming from inside the house. A steady, rhythmic tapping, like someone walking with a cane across the hardwood floor downstairs. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses settle, floors creak. Still, sleep didn't come easily, and when I finally drifted off, I woke again with the sensation of being watched. The bedroom felt heavy, the shadows too dark. My eyes kept darting to the corners of the room, certain I'd see someone standing there. But there was no one. Over the next week, the occurrences escalated. Doors I knew I had locked were found wide open in the morning. Boxes I had sealed the night before were left ripped and scattered. Once I came home from work to find all the kitchen cabinets open, the contents arranged neatly on the counter as if someone had been inspecting them. I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe the cleaning crew had made a mistake. Maybe I was overworked, overtired, imagining things. But one night, as I was brushing my teeth, I saw it. A figure reflected in the bathroom mirror behind me. A man, tall and pale, standing in the hallway. When I spun around, nothing was there. I started sleeping with a baseball bat by my bed. Every sound, the settling of the house, the bump of a floorboard, the whisper of wind, made me jump. The basement became unbearable. The low ceiling seemed to press against me, and the single bulb overhead flickered at the slightest movement. Sometimes I thought I saw shadows moving beneath the stairwell, shapes that shouldn't have been there. One evening, my friend Lisa came over. I hadn't told anyone what was happening, but I wanted a witness. We were watching a movie in the living room when she froze mid-sentence, her eyes widening. "What?" I asked. "There's got someone in the kitchen," she whispered. I turned to look. The kitchen was empty, but the sliding glass door reflected a figure standing behind the couch, a tall, shadowed man with no discernible features. I blinked. The figure was gone. That night, I lay awake, convinced I wasn't alone. Around 2 a.m., I heard the footsteps again, slow, deliberate, moving across the floor above me. They stopped outside my bedroom door. Then, faintly, I heard my name whispered, "Michael." I bolted upright, heart hammering. The door rattled slightly as if someone was testing the handle. I clutched the bat, too terrified to move. The whisper came again, closer, right beside my ear. I don't know how long I stayed like that, tense and frozen until the first light of dawn. When I finally dared to move, the bedroom was empty, the house silent. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the presence lingered, just out of sight. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was all in my head. But the house had its own rules. Certain rooms always felt wrong: the guest bedroom, the hallway outside my bedroom, the basement. Shadows would shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Objects moved on their own, and always that whisper repeating my name when I was alone. I eventually learned from the neighbors that the house had a dark history. Years ago, a man had died upstairs under mysterious circumstances. No one had lived there for long after. I wished I had known before buying, but it was too late. The house was mine, and it seemed determined to make its presence known. Every night I hear the footsteps, the tapping, the whispering. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of him in the corner of my eye, pale, silent, watching. I know he waits for me to be alone, to let my guard down. I sleep with the lights on now, but it doesn't help. The house is awake. It's alive in a way that doesn't make sense, and I am not its only occupant. I don't know what will happen if I stay. I don't know if I can leave. But every day I hear the creaks, the whispers, and the faint tapping, and I know one thing for certain: I am never, ever truly alone in this house. Story the end. I had always dreamed of buying a house in the outskirts of a small American town, far enough from the city to feel private, but close enough for convenience. When I found the listing for a 2-story colonial on a quiet street, I was immediately drawn to it. The house was new, or at least new enough that it smelled faintly of fresh paint and varnished wood, and the yard was large, surrounded by tall, slender trees. I could picture myself hosting summer barbecues and decorating the porch for holidays. The day we moved in, everything seemed perfect. My wife, Jenna, and I carried boxes up the stairs, laughing and planning the layout of our furniture. The neighborhood was quiet, almost eerily so, but we chalked that up to being early in the week. That night, as we slept in the empty master bedroom, I felt a subtle chill. The kind you notice just as you drift off, but then ignore. It started with small things: lights flickering in the hallway, the sound of something brushing across the floor when we thought we were alone. We told ourselves it was the house settling or a draft from the windows. But then came the whispers. At first, we only heard them in the living room late at night. Low, murmured voices, indistinct, almost beneath the level of hearing. I would get up and check, walking from room to room, but found nothing. One morning, I noticed the door to the guest bedroom slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it the night before. The room was empty, except for a chair facing the corner. I shrugged it off, telling Jenna it was nothing. But she noticed it too, and she didn't like to be dismissive about things like this. Over the next few days, the disturbances grew more pronounced. The sound of footsteps above us in the attic, though we had no attic access, repeated at the same time every evening. Doors that we were sure we had locked would be wide open in the morning. Objects went missing and returned in odd places. One night, I woke to the sound of a child laughing. Jenna and I live alone. It wasn't until I found the crawl space beneath the staircase that things took a darker turn. It was hidden behind a panel, painted the same color as the wall. At first, I thought it was just storage, but inside the space was cramped, filled with old belongings, some unidentifiable boxes, a broken rocking chair, and a stack of photographs. The photographs were of the house, but some were old enough to show families I didn't recognize. In each photo, there were people in the background who didn't belong, faces blurred or partially obscured, always watching. When I showed Jenna, her face paled. She flipped through the photos slowly, her hands trembling. In the last photo, the living room looked exactly as it did now, but a figure stood in the hallway. A woman, her face indistinct, her presence unmistakably menacing. After that, we stopped sleeping well. The whispers became clearer, sometimes calling our names. At night, we would hear the slow drag of something moving across the wooden floors, always just outside the rooms we occupied. Jenna refused to go downstairs alone, and I found myself checking the house constantly, flashlight in hand, though I never found anything. Then the writing started. One evening, I was making coffee when I noticed words scrawled across the kitchen window in condensation. Leave. My heart raced, but the windows had been shut. I wiped it away and tried to convince myself it was my imagination. But the next night, in the bathroom mirror, the same word appeared again, larger and more urgent. The house's history gave me chills when I looked it up. Built in the late 1970s, it had gone through multiple owners, and most had left within a year. sometimes abruptly. There were reports of a family leaving after claiming to hear voices and seeing figures. One article mentioned a woman found dead in the bathtub under circumstances deemed an accident, though neighbors whispered that she had been terrified of the house in her final days. Our final night there was the worst. The temperature dropped drastically, though it was midsummer and the lights flickered continuously. In the living room, shadows moved against the walls as if the house itself were alive. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, tall, thin, shrouded in darkness, its face blurred. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching us. The whispers rose to a cacophony of voices, all repeating the same demand: leave. We packed whatever we could and fled in the middle of the night, leaving furniture, belongings, and the photographs behind. I never looked back. The house still sits on that quiet street, perfectly maintained, deceptively serene. I drive past it sometimes, and I swear I see shadows move behind the curtains, figures waiting in the corners of the windows. I've warned friends not to go near it, but curiosity gets the better of people. Every time someone asks about the house, I feel a cold dread, knowing it waits for the next family, patient and hungry, eager to pull them into its darkness. Some houses are just houses, but some are alive in ways you can't explain. I've learned my lesson. Never ignore the small warnings, the whispers, the shadows, and never ever explore hidden doors in a new house. Story the end. It started the day we got the keys. My husband and I had been searching for months, scouring listings, driving through neighborhoods, until finally we found a house that felt right. Not perfect, but it had character. A Victorian-style two-story, painted a soft gray with white trim, a wraparound porch that creaked slightly with the wind, and windows that let in sunlight in a way that made the dust motes dance like little fairies. It wasn't new construction, but the age gave it charm, or so we thought. The previous owner was an elderly man who had passed away quietly, leaving the house empty for almost a year. That didn't bother us. We were looking for something with history. Moving in was exhausting, but thrilling. The boxes, the furniture, the smell of fresh paint mixed with old wood, it all felt like home. But the first night I noticed something odd. The house wasn't quiet. It was alive in subtle ways. Floorboards groaned under unseen weight, pipes whispered, and the wind whistled through small cracks in the windows. At first, we laughed about it, attributing it to the house settling. But the unease started creeping in that same night. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of a faint tapping from the hallway. My husband was asleep beside me, and I didn't want to wake him. The tapping continued, slow, deliberate, almost like someone was walking heel to toe across the wooden floors. I crept out of bed and tiptoed toward the hallway, but when I flicked on the light, there was nothing. Just shadows stretching across the walls, moving as the house seemed to breathe. I shrugged it off as nerves and went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easy after that. Over the next week, things escalated. Small, strange occurrences at first, the kitchen faucet turning on by itself, the closet doors opening and closing with no breeze, the television flicking on in the middle of the night to static. We blamed our exhaustion, the stress of moving, or the house being old and quirky. But then came the noises, voices, whispering, not muffled or distant, but inside the walls. Sometimes it was arguing, sometimes laughter, sometimes sobbing. My husband swore he heard a man calling his name from the basement, and I heard what sounded like a little girl singing from upstairs. We tried to rationalize, thinking our minds were playing tricks on us, that the sounds were echoes, but deep down we both knew something was wrong. The cat we brought with us seemed to sense it immediately. She wouldn't go into certain rooms, arching her back and hissing at empty corners. I began noticing the shadows. At first, just peripheral flashes, shapes at the edge of my vision, but soon I couldn't ignore them. I would turn and they were gone, only to reappear when I blinked. One night I saw a figure standing at the foot of our bed, perfectly still. I froze, staring. My husband, sound asleep, didn't move. The figure disappeared when I sat up. My heart was pounding. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the street lamp outside, but it felt sentient, alive. Then came the physical contact. I was lying in bed one night when I felt a hand brush my hair, not a tickle or a breeze, but firm, deliberate. I bolted upright and the bed was empty. The room was cold. colder than the winter night outside, and my breath was visible in the air. My husband woke to my screaming, but he didn't see anything either. That night, we both slept fully dressed with a baseball bat and kitchen knife on the bed. The house seemed to feed on fear. Each day, the incidents grew more aggressive. Doors slammed when no one was near, pictures fell from the walls, mirrors cracked spontaneously. My husband swore he saw someone standing at the top of the stairs, a dark figure with no discernible features, watching us as we ate dinner. I began locking the doors, even the interior ones, but locks didn't hold. Something had a way of moving through the house unhindered. One evening, I decided to investigate the basement. It was unfinished, dark, and smelled faintly of mold. I brought a flashlight, slowly descending the stairs. The air felt thick, almost alive. Halfway down, I felt a hand grab my ankle. I screamed, and when my husband came running, there was nothing. The basement was empty, except for the shadows. Desperate, we reached out to the neighbors, trying to get some information. Most avoided us. A few spoke in hushed tones, warning us not to stay. One elderly man finally admitted that the house had a terrible history. A family had once lived there, parents and 2 children, and had all died mysteriously over a decade ago. Neighbors said the house had been empty ever since, but sometimes they claimed you could hear them moving inside, even in the dead of night. By now, we were terrified. We barely slept, ate little, and spent most of our time in the living room, lights blazing, doors locked. But the house wasn't done. One night, I woke to a shadow standing at the foot of the stairs, taller than any human, with a shape that seemed wrong, as if it was stretched and warped. It tilted its head toward me, and I saw its eyes, black, hollow, endless. I screamed. My husband came running, but it was gone. The air smelled of decay, and the house groaned like a living thing. Finally, we decided we couldn't stay. We packed what we could, leaving behind nearly everything, and moved into a small apartment across town. It was claustrophobic, but safe. The cat adjusted immediately, sleeping on the couch without fear. I still drive past the house sometimes, and from the window I see curtains moving, shadows flickering, and sometimes the silhouette of a figure watching from the upstairs window. We never went back inside, and we never will. Something lives there, something that doesn't want to be disturbed. I can only hope it stays in that house and doesn't follow us. But at night, when the wind howls and I hear a creak in my apartment building, I can't help but imagine that same shadow lurking, watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting family to move in. Story the end. We had been hunting for our first house for nearly a year when we found it, a small 2-story colonial on the edge of town. The price was low, the yard was big enough for our dogs, and it had a certain charm. If you ignored the peeling paint and the faint lingering smell of mildew. My wife, Laura, fell in love instantly. She called it cozy, and I wanted to believe her. The realtor said the previous owners had moved suddenly, leaving behind most of the furniture. No one knew why, and the house had been empty for months. That detail didn't bother us much at the time. We signed the papers and moved in on a gray, rainy afternoon. The first night, everything seemed normal. The kids were asleep in the rooms we had barely finished unpacking, and Laura and I sat on the couch, sipping wine, laughing about how chaotic moving day had been. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate footstep from upstairs. I froze. Our children's rooms were on the second floor, but I knew they were asleep. Laura didn't hear it, or maybe she ignored it. I told myself it was the house settling. But as the minutes passed, the footsteps continued, pacing slowly above us. I got up to check, quietly, flashlight in hand. Nothing. The kids were asleep. Every door was closed. Every window was locked. I returned to the couch, convincing myself it was nothing. But the noises continued. At first, only at night. Footsteps, whispers, the faint sound of doors opening. Then, during the day, objects began to move. A kitchen knife appeared on the counter, where I had left it in the sink. A framed photograph of our family fell and shattered, though there was no wind, no vibration. Laura began to sense it too. She would wake in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, whispering, "Do you hear that?" I would, and each time I did, the pit in my stomach grew heavier. One evening, I was working late in the study when I heard a whisper directly behind me. I spun around, and there was no one. But the air felt thick, heavy, and I swear I could see a shadow moving just outside the doorway. Our children started having nightmares. My son, 10, would wake screaming about a man watching him from the corner of his room. My daughter, 8, began talking about someone standing silently at the foot of her bed. I tried to dismiss it as children's imagination, but the fear in their eyes was real. The activity escalated. Doors slammed when no one was near, mirrors fogged for no reason, footsteps raced across empty hallways. Laura began locking herself in the bedroom, afraid to sleep alone. I tried reasoning with her, but even I couldn't explain what was happening. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, and the kids were asleep. Laura and I were in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when we heard it, heavy breathing coming from the living room. Not the shallow, tired breathing of a human, but deep, measured, deliberate. I froze. Laura grabbed my arm, pale. I reached for a baseball bat we kept nearby. We slowly moved toward the living room, every muscle tense. The room was empty. Then we heard it again, closer, from the corner. I turned the flashlight and saw him. Tall, pale, shoulders hunched, black hollow eyes staring straight at us. His mouth didn't move, but I could feel the hate radiating from him. Laura screamed, and he vanished. The lights flickered, and when they came back on, every window in the house was wide open. Rain poured in, soaking the furniture and floor. We knew we couldn't stay. We packed what we could and left that night. The realtor tried to calm us, saying maybe it was stress, maybe the house had issues, but we knew better. The house still sits there, empty, waiting. Every now and then, I drive past and see the windows dark, the front door slightly ajar, as if inviting the next family in. Sometimes at night, I hear whispers in my own home. I see shadows out of the corner of my eye. I wonder if he followed us, or if it's just the memory haunting me. I know this much. Some houses aren't empty. Some houses never let go. Story the end.